Under a sky thick with ash-gray clouds, where the wind whispered through jagged stone and dying grass, a single flame flickered in the heart of the wilderness. It danced atop a bed of embers, casting ghostly shadows on the faces of those huddled in silence around it. Their eyes, weathered by countless moons, held the weight of something deeper than hunger or cold. They held the memory of a world unraveling. Across the vastness of what would one day be called Africa, rivers had thinned to ribbons, plains to dust. The rains had vanished as if stolen by the sky itself, and with them went the abundance of life. Giant beasts that once roamed in thunderous herds had dwindled to scattered remnants, their bones becoming as common as stones. The very air carried the scent of parched earth and distant smoke, while the night sounds grew fewer with each passing season. And yet, within this harsh and hollow silence, one question pulsed beneath the skin of every heartbeat. How had these beings, our ancient ancestors, come to the brink of disappearing forever, long before our world wore names or carried memory? Before language wove meaning into sound, there existed earth and sky, and between them moved a fragile kind of fire, human life, small and vulnerable beneath the immensity of the elements. These early wanderers were not yet masters of land and sea, but rather shadows drifting through the margins of survival. They studied the heavens for omens, followed the tracks of prey as if tracing the very breath of the world itself. The landscape in those ancient days formed a mosaic of brutal extremes, its majesty both terrifying and sacred. To the east, the Great Rift Valley cleaved the continent like an ancient wound, cradling lakes that once teemed with abundance, but now contracted into cracked basins of salt and bitter memory. Herds of gazelle and antelope, once the cornerstone of survival, dispersed toward fading horizons, while the predators that hunted them gradually turned their famished eyes toward humankind. Every chosen path invited danger. Every twilight presented a trial of endurance. Yet even amid such profound uncertainty, small bands of Homo sapiens crafted meaning through primal rhythm and solemn ritual. Flint striking bone, ochre, pigment adorning stone, whispers of nascent deities etched into weathered rock faces. They clung to fire, not merely for warmth or protection, but as a precious ember of hope within a vast and increasingly barren world. In the shadow of the fading lakes and along paths carved by forgotten streams, the people moved, slow, deliberate, burdened by the weight of the land's silence. There were no maps, only instinct and inherited memory, passed through gesture and gaze. Children learned to read the wind like their elders, to follow the heartbeat of the earth in the pads of their feet. They tasted the soil to know if it could cradle roots, watched insects rise or vanish like omens. As each moon slipped away, their choices shrank. Gatherings once brimming with laughter withdrew into necessity, and labor became lineage. Some groups sought shelter along ancient riverbeds, scouring cracked canyons for hidden springs, while others climbed into mist-laced highlands, chasing cooler air with every ragged breath. But even in the furthest depths of perseverance, they were not alone. Their world was shared by other kinds of human, kindred in form, yet distinct in ways still unknown and born of different migrations across deep time. Neanderthals to the north, Denisovans further east, pockets of other archaic humans whose bones and blood would one day whisper our interwoven legacy. The stage was vast, the players scattered, and the drought unrelenting. And still they moved, not as conquerors, but as remnants drifting toward a narrowing fate, their survival written in the dust, in the hunger lining their ribs, and in the faith that the world might still remember how to reign. Beneath the blistering sun that loomed with a merciless gaze, time seemed to collapse into ritual. Mornings began in silence, faces adorned with crimson earth pigments, bodies pressed against ancient stone to feel the trembling of distant animal migrations. Silence was not merely absence, but a form of deep listening, movement transformed into an act of reverence. Among clusters of weathered stones shaped into crude hearths, the elders spoke through riddled murmurs, their stories thick with smoke and warning, their voices carrying the weight of generations. They recounted how the rain spirit had turned away from humankind, of sacred balance broken by unseen transgressions, of creatures once plentiful who now retreated into the shadowed marrow of distant mountains. Myth and memory blurred like heat rising from sun-scorched rocks, each generation weaving those echoes into a spiritual compass that guided their desperate journeys. In those moments, when breath felt thin in parched lungs, and the horizon shimmered with cruel illusion, they dreamed not of conquest or abundance, but simply of continuation. The hunt transformed into solemn prayer, each journey becoming a supplication to a vanishing landscape. Season after merciless season, the drought stretched on, the delicate gap between survival and extinction growing thinner than cicada wings. Forests that once stood proud retreated like frightened creatures, their roots curling in desperate search for moisture, while winds that once carried sweet pollen now dragged ash and abrasive sand through the skeletal remains of once fertile valleys. Yet among these dwindling refugees, where life still clung tenaciously to existence, one profound truth lingered in the hearts of the remaining few: that to move was to remember the old ways, and to remember was, perhaps, their only chance to survive. In the dry arches of a cave, mouth half swallowed by the land, an elder pressed his palm to the cold stone wall and sighed as if breathing out the stories of 100 lifetimes. Around him, children sat wide-eyed, their ribs visible with every shallow inhale, yet their attention never wavered. By flickering torchlight, he raised a hand stained with ash and ochre, and his fingers danced ancient symbols into the air, shadows moving like ghosts across limestone surfaces. He spoke of the time before absence, when rivers braided the valley in silver light, when fruit grew sweet and heavy on low branches, when the wind carried the perfume of blossoms rather than the acrid taste of bone dust. But he lingered longest on the falling away, the slow, silent scattering of kin, the vanishing water, the thinning herds. His weathered voice dropped to a reverent whisper as he told of a place far beyond sight and age, a hidden garden cradled in the arms of the mountains, nourished by a secret spring too sacred for even fire to claim. It was there, he proclaimed with trembling certainty, that the last breath of the world still stirred, waiting to be found by those with courage to walk beyond the boundaries of despair. The children did not speak, their small bodies motionless save for the fluttering of eyelids, but the cave filled with a hushed reverence, as if their hearts too beat to the rhythm of those ancient truths. For among the famished clans who wandered this barren landscape, where no path held promise, it was not merely survival they sought, but the rediscovery of a sacred place remembered not through maps or words, but through dreams, passed down through bone and blood, since the dawn of their kind. In the weeks following the elders' story, a stillness settled over the scattered bands. Not a resignation, but something more elemental. A deep gathering of will that rippled through their collective consciousness. Elders with weathered faces and calloused hands conferred in hushed tones beside dwindling fire pits where embers pulsed like dying stars, while young ones listened with growing solemnity, memorizing every word as sacred inheritance. Then, nearly imperceptibly at first, migration began again. Not the desperate wandering that had marked recent moons, but something purposeful, guided, synchronized, like the movements of birds before a great storm. Tribes splintered across the parched landscape, then converged again at crossings marked by ancient stones weathered into impossible shapes, or the bleached rib cages of forgotten giants that arched from the earth like ghostly gateways. Toward the south, across low hills that curled beneath looming cliffs stained with minerals, in colors no living person could name, rumors stirred of a valley where mist gathered each morning, where precious droplets clung to leaves like prayers fulfilled, where life might still remember its ancient covenant with humankind. Word spread slowly across the wind, carried in songs whose melodies predated language itself, and low chants that layered over the silence like thin smoke from a sacred offering. And from their skeletal camps scattered across the dying landscape, the last children of a vanishing age began to rise with newfound resolve in their hollowed eyes. Their feet were cracked and raw from endless journeys, their waterskins brittle as autumn leaves, but their direction was unwavering, guided by stars and stone formations their ancestors had mapped in memory. They did not chase rain. They followed something deeper, drawn by a yearning, woven into their blood, since the first of their kind drew breath. Each step across the blistering earth was a defiance of extinction, a vow whispered through cracked lips that their story would not end in the dust of forgotten bones, but would find its breath again in the fertile hush of the unknown that called to them from beyond the horizon. As night fell over the scorched plains, stars emerged cautiously behind a veil of drifting ash, flickering like ancient eyes watching the earth below. The journeying bands, scattered like embers across the darkened soil, gathered in quiet circles, their breath curling into the cold as they shared what little warmth remained. Some carried talismans of carved bone or feathers bound in braided hair, precious remnants of creatures long vanished from their hunting grounds, while others bore nothing but the memories of voices lost to the drought, carrying them as invisible weights upon weary shoulders. Yet despite the hunger clawing at their bellies with relentless persistence, and the aching void where rivers once flowed, abundant and life-giving, they pressed forward, embodying more than mere survival. They were becoming living myth, vessels of continuity in a fractured world. In their movement, purposeful and slow, echoes of ancient prophecy were fulfilled with each footfall upon the dust. As distant thunder growled across unseen peaks, the sound rolling through canyons and across valleys, misunderstood by most, but revered by the few who remembered the elder tales, hope crystallized in that primordial sound. It was not rain yet, only the breath of mountains exhaling their secret reply to human perseverance, a communion between stone and flesh that transcended words. Still they held on, fingers intertwined in silent solidarity, not to certainty, but to story, to movement, to each other. And so the ancient migration continued, deeper into the heart of the continent, into lands remembered only through song and dream, toward the sacred hollow where the bones of the earth whispered of water, where deep aquifers pulsed beneath limestone caverns, and the first light of returning life waited just beyond the reach of the dying stars. By the time the final stars bled into the violet hush of dawn, the first signs of promise stirred along the horizon. There, nestled between ridges draped in morning fog, the land began to change. The soil softened beneath tired feet, clinging with dampness, and the wind carried not sand, but the faint green breath of moss and fern. Moisture glistened along stone edges, trickling in delicate rivulets down age-old slopes. The eldest among them inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring as they recognized the sacred scent of wet roots and shadowed pools, an aroma striking chords in memory, older than speech itself. Children who had never known abundance stood transfixed, their gaunt faces illuminated with wonder. Cracked palms reached down to touch dew-kissed grasses with reverent hesitation, fingers trembling as if unsure such bounty could be real. This was no myth scribed in smoke or chanted in hunger-born dreams, but a living haven, verdant, hushed and pulsing with vitality. In that valley fed by unseen springs, flanked by high stone walls laced with emerald vines and resonant with forgotten birdsong, they finally rested. Not in triumph, but in profound awe, their weary bones yielding to the earth they had sought across generations of suffering. Somewhere between tear and breath, between gratitude and disbelief, they understood what their ancestors had always known. Survival had not only been a test of flesh, but of faith, memory, and relentless motion. They would build again here, not monuments to human defiance, but humble dwellings aligned with the rhythms they had nearly forgotten, not to conquer the land, but to listen to it, to cradle what was sacred within their collective care. And so, the drought gave way, not with thunderous declaration or overwhelming flood, but with quiet dignity, with tender silence and roots stretching once more into softened earth. The story endured, not as conquest, but as a whispered vow sealed in the veins of those who remembered how to follow the deepest calling of their kind. As firelight dimmed against the growing dawn, shadows softened around their exhausted forms, and the first true sleep in countless moons came to them, not as escape, but as profound peace. But not all who wandered found sanctuary. Along the jagged margins of the sacred valley, where the softened land met the arid stone, smaller groups arrived worn and too late, their bodies ravaged by starvation, spirits dimmed to fading embers. Some collapsed before the first scent of moss reached their nostrils, final breaths absorbed by the indifferent dust. Others fell within sight of salvation, eyes widened in terrible wonder, withered fingers outstretched toward a verdant promise they would never touch. Their final moments, witnessed only by circling birds in the ancient stones, carried a profound dignity in their terrible finality. Yet even these loss-burdened sacrifices were not in vain. Their journeys, immortalized through drum beats echoing across generations and preserved in hushed chants around early hearths, crystallized into the foundation of something sacred, a covenant between human and earth. They became the ancestral whispers of reverence and balance, an unwritten law threading through all who survived, that the land and its blessings must never again be forgotten or harvested without ceremony and offering. The The survivors marked their arrival not with triumph or conquest, but with quiet rituals of gratitude. Stones were stacked with deliberate intention along ridgelines where mist gathered, smoke lifted skyward with bird feathers and fragrant resin, crystal clear water sipped with reverence that bordered on transcendent grief. As seasons unfolded into years, generation after generation flourished in that hidden cradle, not as masters of earth, but as attentive listeners, interpreters of wind patterns, plant wisdom, and animal discourse. Children learned to read the stars, not as distant lights, but as familiar guardians, to recognize the subtle changes in bark texture that preceded seasonal shifts, to hear in the cricket's evening chorus warnings of coming weather. They absorbed the rhythms anew, not forced into memory by the lash of suffering, but chosen in conscious harmony through oral tradition and lived practice. Within the sanctuary, in this precious sliver of post-drought peace, humankind was not only reborn, but rerouted in a profound humility that would shape them for millennia. The Great Drought had nearly extinguished their flame from existence, but it had also bound them irrevocably to the land, etched their survival into the very marrow of the world so deeply that even now, long forgotten beneath countless layers of time and civilization, the earth remembers. It remembers not the cleverness nor the ambition of early humans, but the patient silence of their waiting, the unwavering courage in their desperate movement, and the breathless awe with which they received the rain when it finally returned to their parched world. Deep in the cradle of that hidden valley, as centuries coiled slowly around the bones of memory, a new way of being unfurled like green shoots after fire. Each dawn became a sacred blessing, each dusk an intricate ritual painted across the sky. They sang not to summon rain, but to honor its faithful return, voices rising and falling with the currents of gratitude. The fire still burned in their gatherings, but now it danced beneath laughter, softened by abundance and stories retold not solely from grief, but from profound awe and reverence. The drought remained preserved in their lore, not as a tormentor, but as a stern guardian of wisdom, learned through hunger, thirst, and contemplative silence. They had traversed from death's shadowed doorstep, wandered through thresholds flanked by ash and bleached bone, and arrived finally into a sacred stillness that hummed with life's renewal. In that stillness, they did not merely rebuild the old world, they dreamed carefully a new one, where resilience was carried in water vessels crafted from river clay, where kindness was etched into stone tools passed from calloused hands to tender ones. No towering monument stood to proclaim their presence, no elaborate records inscribed upon permanent tablets, only the wind threading through baskets of intricately woven reed, the verdant moss lying thick along shaded rock faces, and the shadows of ancestors walking quietly through the morning fog, ghosts made visible in every act of care and remembrance. For those who had survived the Great Drought had not conquered time. They had become its reverent keepers, its devoted students. And somewhere, beneath layers of sediment and fossilized bone, within the sacred silence of that valley, the story endures, not in written words, but in twisted roots, in ancient dust, in rhythms older than conscious memory, whispering still of the time when humankind nearly vanished from existence, and in that near vanishing came to truly belong to the earth at last. 1,000 lifetimes later, the wind still moves through that long hidden valley, threading between moss-laden stones and whispering across the bark of ancient trees grown from the seeds of survival. Though time has swallowed the names and faces of those first flame bearers, the earth has kept their story guarded in its deep places, sealed within rings of trees that remember each drought-scarred season. In the mineral-rich soil where ancient footprints once pressed, crystalline waters now bubble forth from limestone hollows, carrying whispers of those who first discovered this sanctuary. Birds with iridescent plumage nest where once only silence dwelled, their songs echoing the cadence of long-forgotten chants. In every verdant leaf unfurling toward sunlight, in every root system spreading beneath the nourishing soil, their presence endures, not in legacy of conquest or domination, but in one of profound belonging. These ancient ancestors were not the strongest among the hominids who roamed Earth's varied landscapes, nor the most numerous as their population dwindled to mere hundreds. But they persevered through unimaginable hardship, and in doing so, they offered the world an inheritance shaped not by might, but by reverence and sacred attentiveness. Their harrowing journey through fire and famine transcended mere survival. It became a pilgrimage, a prayer etched into the very bedrock of human consciousness. And long after the last torch dimmed, and their footprints were lost to the inexorable crawl of geological time, the earth still carries their breath in its seasonal rhythms, as if in gratitude for their steadfast devotion. So when pearl-gray mist settles over forgotten ridges and life-giving rain returns to lands that once cracked with unrelenting thirst, know this with certainty, that somewhere in that primordial rhythm, the bones of the Great Drought still sing across 70,000 years of silence. Not of extinction or despair, but of devotion to life itself. Not of violence or conquest, but of a fragile hope carried through scorching silence, choking dust, and impenetrable darkness, all the way into life's trembling, triumphant return. Even now, among the fossil beds etched deep into the African crust, where ancient bones lie curled in postures of final rest, whispers of that long drought echo in the wind-polished stone. Archaeologists uncover mandibles and arrowheads, ochre-streaked hearth remains, and pollen samples preserved in soil darkened by millennia. Each fragment a prayer folded into the earth from hands that had nothing left but faith. Carbon dated to approximately 70,000 years ago, these remnants reveal a population bottleneck so severe that humanity dwindled to perhaps fewer than 10,000 individuals across the continent. Though we cannot hear their voices, we walk in the silence they endured, our DNA carrying the genetic signature of their near extinction. And in that silence, in the stillness between thunderclap and rainfall, between famine and the trembling arrival of possibility, we inherit more than genetic fragments or evolutionary milestones. We inherit the testament of a people who believed in the very face of forgetting, that memory could become shelter and reverence could be enough to knit soul back into body. Their symbolic thinking, evidenced in ochre markings and rudimentary tools, suggests a cognitive revolution born not of abundance, but of scarcity, where imagination became as vital as water itself. Somewhere beneath our modern noise, lodged deep in marrow, is the pulse of that drought, of a species that should have ended, but instead chose courage. So let us listen with humility, for the story they left behind is not buried, it is breathing, rising between the heartbeat of rain and the hush of stars, waiting as they once did, for us to remember. Beneath layers of dust and rock, buried in the silence of collapsed shelters and sunken campfires, lie the cryptic blueprints of our own becoming. Genetic traces, mitochondrial signatures, and cultural echoes whisper through time, confirming that every living human today descends from those few who endured the crucible of desolation. Their legacy is not merely biological, but profoundly spiritual, engraved in our instinct to gather around flame, to seek meaning in song and sky, to remember through symbols and stories when all else has been stripped away. Our tongues still form syllables shaped by those first calls, sent across wind-swept ridges, vowels that once summoned kin to scarce food, or stilled hearts when predators lurked nearby. Our eyes still instinctively search for water in the shimmer of distant horizons. Our bodies remember the rhythms of seasonal migration in ways our conscious minds have forgotten. In ceremonial drums that echo through villages, in lullabies whispered to infants, in the reverent silence before rainfall, the Great Drought lingers not as a scar, but as a sacred thread spun through the very fiber of our collective soul. What nearly extinguished our kind ultimately defined us, not through annihilation, but through reverence, resilience, and the quiet promise etched into stone and whispered into dying embers, that in our darkest hour, when all seemed lost to the merciless sun and barren earth, we did not vanish. We remembered, and so the memory of that ancient drought endures not in textbooks or recorded tongues, but in the architecture of our instincts, in the bone-deep response to scarcity, the near-reverent pause before a sip of rainwater, the stories we weave during times of crisis. It lives in the hemispheres of our brain that imagine beyond hunger, in the resilience passed through generations without wound or scar, just quiet knowing. Across the globe, in every pocket where humans now rise with the dawn, harvest under swelling moons, and sing lullabies to the stars, echoes of those dusk-bound ancestors resonate like low drum beats beneath the clamor of modern life. We do not remember their names, but we carry their faith. We do not see their faces, but feel their imprint in the shared warmth of palms held around fire, in the hush that comes when lightning slices the sky. The Great Drought was not the end of a story, but its sacred threshold. It taught humanity that survival is not strength alone, but the courage to listen when the world grows quiet, to trust the ancient pull of story, of place, of each other. And in that listening, we did not only endure, we became. When fire flickers and wind slips through untouched trees, when the first drops kiss dry earth, their legacy returns for a breath, reminding us that we are the continuation of a prayer first spoken long before words existed, a thread unbroken through millennia of silence, hunger, wandering, and wonder, whispering still, we are here. Because they remembered, far beneath the soil, where limestone veins pulse with ancient moisture and roots embrace the bones of forgotten kin, the earth holds steady the quiet aftermath of humanity's narrow escape. In this hallowed stillness, there are no grand declarations or monuments risen in memory, only sediment, rich with time, accumulates patiently around silent artifacts, entombing the whispered origin of all that would follow. The Great Drought did not leave ruins of towering cities or scriptures carved into stone, but something far more profound, a sacred covenant between life and land, sealed through suffering, etched in humility, and cradled by the unseen memory of the planet itself. Within the crystalline structures of minerals formed over millennia, in the silent chambers where underground rivers still carve pathways through darkness, these ancient truths continue to resonate. The drought's legacy lives not as mere prehistoric event, but as the quiet core of our shared becoming, the crucible that forged our deepest relationship with Earth. And as time summons forth glittering empires and then reclaims them into dust, that ancient covenant remains unbroken across countless generations. Not for glory or conquest did our ancestors persevere, but for life itself, for reverence toward what sustains us, for the sacred flame we still kindle against encroaching darkness. The tale rests now, encircled by stone and silence, pulsing still in the heart of the earth, waiting for another era when humankind might pause long enough to listen, not with eyes or ears alone, but with the deepest chambers of the soul, where ancestral memory still flickers like dying embers. Beneath all our technological wonders and crumbling ruins, beneath layers of forgetting and distraction, the earth remembers. And perhaps, in moments of profound stillness, when the world grows quiet and the stars reveal their ancient patterns overhead, so do we, through the rhythmic cycles of drought and bloom, loss and renewal, humanity would carry echoes of that near-ending forward through time, shaping myths, rituals, and the pulse of culture that flowed like water from that singular source of survival. Though the path ahead bent with countless turns, other hardships, migrations, and extinctions, what had been forged in the crucible of the Great Drought persisted as a quiet architecture of the human spirit, embedded in the fingers that weave baskets for newborns, in the reverent hush before planting seed in dry soil, in the aching lull of a song that rises where language cannot tread. The memory remains visceral and profound. No single fire burns from that time. No cave remains untouched by relentless wind and passing centuries. Yet their legacy endures in the most enduring place of all, the collective breath of our species. For beneath the peril and scarcity, beneath even the primal fear that stalked their every step, was an unshakable truth. That life is sacred not because it is strong, but because it remembers how close it came to silence. This wisdom, passed down not only in bloodline, but in wonder and awe, remains the unspoken prayer that lingers in the wind, that shapes dancing shadows in firelight, that settles softly in the weighted silence before every storm. Their tools may have turned to dust. Their footprints may have vanished beneath countless layers of sediment, but their breath walks with us still, whispering through the corridors of time. Remember the drought, remember the thirst, and remember you belong to this earth, not as conqueror, but as grateful witness to its enduring mercy. And in that breathless witness, we remain, touched not only by the science of their survival, but by the story left behind in elements and echoes. The drought did not merely sculpt landscapes or shift populations, it etched reverence into the bones of a species. What emerged was not a human being hardened by calamity, but one softened into sacred awareness, capable of memory, myth, and meaning. We inherit more than endurance. We inherit this holy awareness, this ancient vow of interdependence. Somewhere in the rhythm of rain on leaves, in the hush before a child speaks, in the trembling moments of ceremony around fire, that first truth pulses through us. though time has worn smooth the stones they once knelt upon, and winds have scattered their ashes into every corner of the world. The story is not lost. It lives in us, in the feeling of belonging that arises when we stand beneath trees older than names, in the humility of open palms, receiving water, in the instinct to gather, protect, remember. Their journey continues within us, unfinished not because the path is incomplete, but because its end is never singular. The story of survival is also the story of becoming. And the earth still listens, in silence, in storm, in the crescents of footprints that press briefly into wet soil, waiting for us to remember once more what it means to be part of something older, deeper, and more sacred than mere survival. To be human and to belong. So, when the rains come again, as they always do in time, cascading gently against thirsty leaves or returning with thunderous fury across parched valleys, they do more than merely nourish, they remember. They fall upon sacred lands, once traversed by hollow-eyed wanderers whose only weapon against extinction was unwavering faith, whose only map was ancestral memory inscribed in blood, and whose every footfall represented a profound gesture of belonging.
They must know the story.
In every floodplain where emerald reeds now bend reverently low, in every limestone cave where ancient echoes still cling to soot-darkened walls like ghostly fingerprints, the breath of those first survivors stirs still, weightless yet unyielding against the erosion of millennia. The devastating drought that once threatened a silent final chapter for humankind instead gave way to a sacred beginning, one not etched in monuments of conquest, but in whispered reverence, tempered by fire, dust, and mournful song. And now, long after fragile bone transformed into silent stone and human whispers dispersed into timeless wind, their story waits not in grand temples or carved obelisks, but in each gesture of humility toward the nourishing land, each grateful sigh offered beneath a wide, star-scattered ancestral sky. That primal narrative of humanity standing at the precipice of oblivion and choosing instead to listen deeply to the wisdom of Earth and cosmos remains the oldest vow ever carried within human breath, an unbroken thread winding through our collective consciousness. And with every silvery drop of rain that finds its way home to thirsty soil, the earth replies softly, almost tenderly, with maternal grace, "You were never forgotten." Let that final whisper stretch beyond generations, not as a fading echo, but as a sacred rhythm returning with each season's breath. For in the closing hush of the Great Drought's tale, what remains is not the fear nor the desolation, but the quiet teachings passed from firelit circle to starlit journey, a covenant carved not into tablets of stone, but into the interplay between breath and earth, movement and stillness, knowing and remembering. Humanity, spared by a fragile thread, chose not to emerge as rulers of a scarred realm, but as witnesses with humbled eyes. The ancient ones who survived carried forward not triumph, but profound reverence for the tenuous balance of existence. Their legacy endures in the way water is cupped in reverent palms, how the first rain clouds on a horizon still cause hearts to quicken, how fire is still tended with ritualistic care. The pathway forward was never paved in conquest, but in gratitude, in the whispered stories that taught children to listen before they spoke, to observe before they acted, to honor before they took. And so the story ends where it must, in silence, with soil underfoot and stars above as it began. The drought may be long vanished, dissolved into geologic silence and myth, but the vow remains in every careful footprint, in every watchful gaze toward the sky, in every breath drawn with awareness. For once, long ago, we nearly disappeared. And in choosing to remember, we became human. This, then, is the final echo, the last ember before silence. In that perilous passage so many ages ago, when humanity hovered on the edge of vanishing, the earth bore quiet witness and kept their memory secure, cradled in root and riverstone. Not every name was spoken again, not every path retread, but their essence, uttered in songs of survival that became lullabies and warnings alike, lives within us still. They gave no speeches, left no laws, yet instilled in their descendants the one wisdom that endures beyond all ruin. To walk this world not as its master, but as its witness, its steward, its child. Their footprints may have vanished beneath countless seasons of dust and rain, but their profound reverence for life's fragile balance resonates through the corridors of our DNA, a silent testimony to what it means to truly belong to the earth. Their ashes now whisper in mountain wind and swirl beneath ancient trees that lean to hear tomorrow's secrets. So let the rains fall, as they always shall, upon bones transformed to dust and dreams transformed to legacy. Let night settle over the valley and fire warm the sacred gathering once more. For though their candles burned low in the vast darkness of impending extinction, though their voices fell to hushed whispers against the howling winds of desolation, they remembered. And through that remembering, through that unbroken thread of consciousness stretching across 70 millennia of time, we live, and we live still, not in isolation, not in dominion, but as part of that ancient rhythm forged in dust and devotion. Each sunrise over fertile floodplain, each hushed reverence before planting, and every shared story under firelit canopy carries vestiges of that epical crucible. The Great Drought, through its merciless silence and harrowing trial, rewrote the very essence of what it meant to endure. It etched into our collective spirit, not monuments, but meaning, not relics, but remembrance, a wisdom passed through generations without words. In caves where hands once trembled against cracked walls, where ochre paintings captured the souls of vanished herds, we now trace our origins not through hubris, but humility. We came closer to oblivion than our species should have survived, hovering at extinction's precipice, with merely hundreds of souls remaining. But in that terrible narrowing, we found something eternal, not power, but purpose. The parched earth taught us that to remember is to live rightly, to tread with reverent feet, to know the sacredness of scarcity and the sanctity of abundance. So as the winds press through high grasses and rainwater pools, where once the earth split open in desperate thirst, let every human heartbeat that follows murmur this ancestral vow. We rose through forgetting, but we remain through remembering. And in the hush between wildfires, in the green return, in the quiet beneath our grieving and our wonder, in the sacred spaces where mist gathers at dawn and shadows lengthen at dusk, the old covenant endures. Life, fragile as flame, fierce as roots, bound forever to the land that sheltered us into becoming. And so this tale settles into the dust once more, hidden among wind-swept dunes and beneath stone ledges where shadows linger longer than the sun's touch. It is not a story told in triumphs or victories, but one scribed in the raw testament of endurance, in the echo of bare feet, tracing paths of uncertain outcome, yet unwavering purpose. The Great Drought, that merciless teacher of time, demanded everything and offered nothing in return but silence. Yet within that profound absence, humanity discovered its truest voice. It was not thunder that shaped us, but the haunting stillness that followed, not rain that saved us, but the visceral memory that such water had once fallen and would again. We are the breath after the storm, the resonance of a prayer nearly lost to oblivion, formed not by monuments we constructed, but by the sacred stories we refused to surrender to dust. Let this be the inheritance passed with reverent hands between generations, the deep-rooted reverence for the earth that cradled us through darkness, the unflinching memory of the hunger that nearly unmade us, and the enduring covenant that as long as we remember our place within the greater tapestry of existence, we truly belong. In the soil rich with mineral memory, in the narratives woven through starlight and shadow, in the hallowed quiet beneath returning rain, the ancestors continue their eternal whisper, and through our living breath, they are never truly silent. So let us leave them now, not with farewell, but with attentiveness, not in conclusion, but in veneration. Let the final embers fade gently into the hush, leaving only the sacred pulse of what they entrusted to the future. A rhythm whispered in the curve of stone, the taste of water, the silence before dawn. The Great Drought ended not merely in rainfall, but in remembrance, in the quiet awakening of a species forever changed. The ancestors, whose voices spoke in wordless songs and whose prayers rose in firelight and breath, did not vanish into darkness. They became the pulse beneath every root we tread upon, the whisper in every sacred grove we pass, without knowing why our steps grow lighter in its shade. Though their bodies have long returned to dust, their legacy courses through our living hands and open hearts, through our shared longing for meaning, home, and continuity. Their wisdom lives in the way we pause before disturbing still waters, in how we treasure the scent of coming rain, in our instinctive reverence for places untouched by human hands. So may we tread gently upon this earth, remembering not only their peril, but their promise, not only their struggle, but their deep listening. For as the earth still sings beneath starlit skies, and the rain still falls upon parched soil, as children still gather near flickering flames to hear stories woven from soil and sky, the covenant remains unbroken. The tale of humankind's near vanishing is not only one of survival against impossible odds, it is the first and oldest testament that we are meant not to rule this earth with dominion and might, but to belong to it with reverence and wonder, now and forever. As the firelight dwindles and the night presses gently against the skin of the valley, we come to the final breath of this ancestral memory. Not an end, but a return to silence, to the sacred hush that once cradled their bones and now gathers softly at the edges of our own awareness. The Great Drought did not pass away with fanfare or fury, but with the same quiet persistence that marked every step of those who endured it. In their journey, we find our mirrors, not just in the lines of our DNA or footprints echoed in soil, but in the feeling of reverence that still stirs when we stand beneath rain-filled skies. They did not leave behind empires or wonders of stone. Only this, an inheritance of wonder, an ache laced with awe, a story etched not in monuments, but in the rhythm of breath and belonging. Across 70 millennia, their whispers still rise with the morning mist, carrying the wisdom born of near extinction, reminding us that our existence hangs by threads of memory and reverence rather than dominion. The land remembers them in the slow pulse of underground springs, in the mineral-rich soil that once absorbed their tears and blood, in the ancient pathways where desperate footprints once pressed toward hope. And so, may we carry it with us, this sacred remembering of the time when humankind came close to silence and chose instead to listen deeply, to walk forward with humility, and to become part of Earth's enduring story. When the stars rise next, and the wind stirs the leaves beyond words, remember not only their struggle, but their offering. For they did not just survive the drought, they gave us the memory that made us human. A covenant sealed not in victory, but in vulnerability, not in conquest, but in the quiet courage to continue. And so, the fires have dimmed, the footfalls have faded, and the stone-lined paths once formed by desperate resolve return quietly to dust. Yet the story remains. It lingers beyond the grasp of time, pulsing in the marrow of children yet unborn, humming where rain meets root and shadow paints rock with memory. The Great Drought is no longer merely a chapter of prehistoric peril, but the sacred beginning of human reverence, a profound awakening etched into our collective consciousness. Through 70 millennia of storms and stillness, this ancient wisdom has whispered through generations, carried in ritual and reverent gesture, in the way water is cupped in grateful palms, in how the first clouds on a distant horizon still quicken the heart. What nearly extinguished our flame ultimately defined us, not through annihilation, but through an unbreakable covenant with the earth itself. The ancestors who walked through that merciless trial left no towering monuments or elaborate inscriptions, only this, an inheritance of deep listening, of movement aligned with sacred memory, of belonging rather than conquering. As the final breaths of that age dissolve into the breath of now, the tale settles where it always belonged, in silence, deep and enduring. The earth turns slowly beneath a sky older than words, its soil rich with the minerals of forgotten bones, its winds still carrying the essence of ancient prayers. It remembers, and in that remembering, so do we. Let the silence now embrace what remains, soft as the fog that once draped the ancient valley where hope first returned to weary hearts. For in that sacred hush, past all the words and images, the true inheritance breathes. It is not a tale to be retold with grandeur, but with reverence, in the stillness before dawn, where memories do not need names to endure. The Great Drought, that perilous crucible on the edge of extinction, lives on not for the hardship it wrought, but for the transformation it inspired, changing a wandering species into one capable of awe, of reflection, of reverent continuity. It was never just about survival. It was about remembering that no life flourishes alone, that each step leaves a resonance, each breath contributes to the sacred chorus of earth. So let the final embers fade, let the wind sweep gently the last ancestral songs into the soil, and let us walk forward with the understanding that to exist is to belong, to listen, to carry reverence like a torch through the darkness. For in the story of their survival, etched in root and flame, we find the quiet origin of what it means to be human, and in remembering that story, we honor the breath that still connects us all. And as this sacred breath draws to a close, the ancient winds once more coil around the valley, brushing against stone and leaf like the pages of a story closing within the heart of the earth. No flames remain, only the faint warmth where memory clings to weathered surfaces and hollow spaces. No hushed voices echo now, only the profound silence that follows when something has been fully spoken into existence. The Great Drought has passed into the deep wells of Earth's recalling. Its legacy no longer tragedy, but transfiguration, a crucible that forged humanity, not through conquest, but through reverence. We leave not bones, nor fire, nor song behind, but the quiet assurance that reverence endures beyond ruin, that in the soft communion between sky and soil, our ancestors' final gift was not merely survival, but wisdom that transcends time. It speaks in the moments we instinctively hesitate before taking from the land, the way we bow our heads when rain first touches parched earth, the collective hush that overtakes us when firelight dances against the gathering darkness. Against all mathematical odds, they endured the unimaginable emptiness, the merciless sun, the dwindling herds, the children's hunger. And in doing so, they taught us that to live in right relation with the earth is not to overcome it, but to remember it, to carry it within us as a sacred, breathing truth embedded in marrow and memory. Let this be the end not of the telling, but the settling, the final ash-patterned breath of all that was entrusted across the dark hush of 70 millennia, carried forward in DNA and dream alike. Not vanished, not lost, simply returned with profound gratitude to the ancient soil that remembers everything, from the lightest human footfall to the weight of our collective becoming. For in the twilight hush of every age since, humankind has never truly walked alone. Beneath each footfall lies the resonance of those first fragile journeys, and within each heartbeat echoes the memory of a world so close to silence it became sacred. This is the final invocation, the last reverent bow at the altar of time, where the story of the Great Drought settles not as an end, but as a sacred continuity. They gave us no commandments, but planted within us a memory older than language, a knowing deeper than blood. And in this memory, we find both our beginning and our becoming, a truth held still in breeze-swept grasses, in the glint of water after long thirst, in the silence between thunderheads. When we stand before ancient rivers or beneath star-scattered skies, something within us remembers not just the suffering, but the reverence born from it. The wisdom of our ancestors flows through us when we pause to honor what sustains us, when we recognize the sacred bond between humanity and earth. Their near extinction taught them, and now teaches us, that true power lies not in dominion, but in belonging. With gratitude wrapped in quiet awe, we return to the earth, not to leave it, but to dwell within it once more, to move forward bearing the rhythm of all who came before, the ones who remembered the rain when none fell, who held on to story when hope thinned, and who left us this final inheritance beneath open skies, to belong, to remember, to endure. And with that, the sacred breath exhales, and the fires, at last, rest. And so, upon the last curve of this story's sacred arc, let silence now carry what words cannot. The Great Drought may have ended in cycles long buried beneath stratified time, but its memory pulses still, raw and solemn, in the breath we take before we speak, in the hush we hold before we act. It was never merely a trial, but a birth, an emergence into awareness carried not by dominance, but by surrender to the living world. The ancestors who endured left behind no riches, only roots, no monuments, only meaning. And through them we trace not a lineage of rulers, but of reverent walkers, listeners, rememberers. We are the continuation of that sacred silence, the echo of that persistent flame. From famine's edge sprang imagination, from dust, ritual, from despair, devotion. As the stars now rotate once more over lands they crossed barefoot and hungry, the earth turns gently beneath their memory. And so we end not in darkness, but in sacred dusk, wrapped in the resonance of all they became, held softly in the ancestral breath that whispers still through rock and rain. Remember, endure, belong. Let the last light of this tale flicker gently against the walls of memory, then fade with grace into the quiet soil from which it once rose. The ancestors who braved the fireless nights and thirst-choked dawns left behind no carvings on granite, no declarations in stone, only the imprint of endurance etched into the marrow of our collective being. Their story does not conclude here because stories such as these never truly end. They settle deep within us like seeds waiting for rain, dormant yet vibrant with potential. When night falls and our fires still burn low with communal breath, when winds stir tall grass in unfamiliar lands, and a child leans into their guardian's silence for comfort, it is that same ancient rhythm that stirs once more, unbroken through 70 millennia. The Great Drought has passed into myth, into sediment and stardust, but its reverence lives on in the hush before a storm, in the sacred care with which we speak of sky and soil, in the instinctive gratitude that rises unbidden when water touches our lips. And though their footprints have long since vanished into the tides of time, their memory flows forward, threaded through our waking lives like breath, invisible, essential, eternal. That is the true end, not of flame or famine, but of forgetting. And in its place stands memory, patient and enduring, testifying for all time that we belong, not because we conquered, but because we remembered the covenant that binds us to this earth and to each other across the endless expanse of years. So let the wind carry what remains, threads of ash and memory drifting across the ages, stitching together sky and soil in a bond deeper than time. Let us leave behind the fire's last breath as it fades into embers, and walk quietly from the sacred circle where story and silence met. These final steps do not close a tale, but honor a truth that lives beyond telling, that when humankind stood at the edge of forgetting, it chose instead to remember, to belong, to endure. The ancestors who survived left no monuments to mark their passage, yet their legacy flows through every raindrop that kisses the earth, every breath drawn in reverence, every shadow that lingers beneath the canopy of stars. In this final hush, where history meets heartbeat, their voice is not lost, but transmuted, becoming our own, a wisdom carried in the marrow of generations. Their whispers echo through ancient root systems, flow with rivers carving patient paths through stone, and settle softly in the stillness between all things. This is the inheritance they left us wrapped in silence, to live not above the land, but within it, as stewards rather than conquerors, as witnesses rather than masters. And with that sacred remembering, as the final embers cool to ash and starlight bathes the sleeping valley, the story returns at last to the soil, not ended, but eternally present, breathing through the pulse of all that endures. And so, beneath the starlit hush that cradles the valley where the first prayers of memory once rose, the final thread returns to the loom of silence. The fire has long faded, the stories laid gently into soil and wind, their rhythms adopted by the roots and rivers that endure unseen. The Great Drought, that formidable crucible of time, did not vanish with its passing. It became the fertile darkness in which our shared humanity first took root. It taught us that survival is not a conquest, but a ceremony of sacred remembrance, where each footfall, each breath, each reverent pause is stitched with ancestral knowing. Across the expanse of continents and time, in every place where wind bends the grass and rain wakes the waiting earth, their legacy pulses, a quiet covenant unshaken by empire or invention. If we listen closely, with hearts open to the first hush before dawn, we may still feel their presence not as ghosts, but as kin, walking with us through every storm in silence, their weathered palms pressing against the small of our backs when courage fails. They walked once so that the story could continue, crossing barren plains with parched lips and unwavering resolve, carrying the fragile ember of our collective future. And in returning, again and again, to this sacred remembering, in honoring the whispers that rise from ancient soil and settle in the marrow of our bones, we ensure their journey never ends. So let us close this sacred telling not with applause or finality, but with breath held in quiet awe. In the deepest chambers of the earth's memory and the stillest folds of our human spirit, the story of the Great Drought survives as more than myth. It remains a living tether to who we were when we first became who we are. It is not the memory of hardship alone that carries weight, but the reverence honed within it, the way hunger led to reflection, thirst shaped humility, and silence birthed meaning. Our ancestors did not prevail through dominance, but through deep listening, through movement aligned with purpose, through the sacred choice to carry memory forward when all else threatened to fade. Beneath every field that bears fruit and every forest that breathes against the sky, their longing still pulses, soft and unseen, guiding us to honor what we owe the earth and one another. This is the final breath of the oldest story, one not extinguished, but passed gently into us, asking only that we remember, and in remembering, belong, and thus, the embers of that sacred memory dim not into disappearance, but into integration, dissolving into the soil beneath our feet, the breath we draw in unguarded stillness, the stories we carry like vessels shaped by fire. The Great Drought no longer stands as a warning of oblivion, but as the oldest testament to what it truly means to be human, to suffer without surrender, to wander without losing faith, to remember when all else fades. From that perilous brink emerged not giants of conquest, but keepers of reverence, not lords of a wounded earth, but witnesses to its enduring grace. Their journey, whispered now through stone matrices and the curvature of genomic threads, reverberates in every act of quiet wonder, every gesture of gratitude toward rain, root, and fire. And though the winds may scatter all we build and time may bury even our boldest achievements, this single truth remains imperishable, that when the path grew darkest, They chose not despair, but remembrance. And through that choice, they became the first to truly belong. So let us hold that ember close, cup it gently with humbled hands, and walk on not as conquerors, but as living echoes of their vow, guardians of the sacred breath that first endured through fire, thirst, and silence. The story rests now, not finished, but fulfilled, alive in every rustle of wind through grass, in every drop of sacred rain. Remember, endure, belong, and from somewhere unseen in the depths of time, where memory folds upon itself, like layers of sediment in ancient riverbeds, we rise, not because we conquered the wilderness, but because we endured with reverence. The Great Drought carved more than scarcity into the parched landscape. It etched a sacred humility into the very marrow of our species, a profound quietude that resonates still in every human gesture of survival, touched by wonder. We close this journey not with triumphant certainty, but with trembling gratitude for those hollow-eyed ancestors who walked the ragged edge of extinction so that we might walk today upon rain-softened earth, beneath skies that remember how to weep. Their legacy pulses in each heartbeat that pauses before taking from the land, in every ear that listens before speaking, in the ceremonial hush that still falls over us when the first clouds gather after absence. The covenant they sealed with their suffering holds firm across 70 millennia, through countless generations of forgetting and remembering. We are their continuation, not merely in blood and bone, but in our capacity for sacred remembrance. So let the last flame fade to cooling ash. Let silence reclaim the valley where hope first returned to parched throats. Let the earth cradle what has been entrusted, its soil enriched with the breath of those who remained steadfast when nothing sustained them but the dream of rain. We remember, we endure, we belong, and so, as this ancient remembering dissolves into the wordless hush from which it first emerged, we leave the sacred valley not in departure, but in communion. Beneath the stars that once bore silent witness to desperate migration, the earth breathes evenly once more, a testament to a promise fulfilled in silence rather than spectacle. The Great Drought has returned to the soil of memory, folded within roots and stone, not as catastrophe alone, but as the first liturgy of belonging. Its echoes ripple through time, shaping not the skyline of cities, but the curve of cupped hands, the reverent silence before a storm, the instinctive awe when life takes root in the aftershock of ruin. It lives on in the rhythm of rivers reclaimed, in flame tended with quiet devotion, in the hush that falls when a story reminds us who we are beneath invention and noise. This legacy transcends mere survival, becoming instead a profound testament to human resilience and spiritual connection with the land that sustains us. The ancestors who wandered through that merciless crucible left no monuments of conquest, only the sacred inheritance of reverence that flows through our veins, still awakening whenever we pause to honor what nourishes us. Their footprints may have vanished beneath countless seasons of wind and rain, but their essence remains vivid in our collective consciousness, guiding us toward harmony rather than dominion. This tale, spanning 70 millennia, needs no further telling, only living, breathed in each act of care, carried forward in the marrow of those who walk gently with the land. Let this closing breath be both reverence and return, a settling back into the sacred soil from which all story rises. an unending vow written not in stone, but in the soft resilience of memory and the enduring wisdom that flows through every human who still remembers how to listen. The fire rests now. The earth holds us. And the story, ancient and alive, continues in every footfall, guided by gratitude and the unshakable whisper. We are here because they remembered. In the hush that follows such telling, when the fire has ceased and only the heartbeat of the earth remains, we understand that the story of the Great Drought was never meant to end in words, but in living memory. It was a genesis written in ash and breath, a sacred inheritance spun from silence and survival that continues wherever reverence guides the hand. The ancestors left behind no written scripture, no carved edict, yet we carry their covenant beneath our skin, in the way we pause beneath storm-lit skies and feel something ancient stir within us. Their passage through desolation was not merely the origin of our survival, but the foundation of our belonging to the land, to one another, to the quiet truth that life endures, not in spite of hardship, but because of the wisdom born within it. These ancient wanderers who faced extinction crafted more than tools from stone and bone. They forged a relationship with existence itself, one that whispers still in our collective consciousness. Their footprints may have vanished beneath millennia of windswept soil, but their essence remains in our instinctive reverence for water, for fire, for the subtle rhythms of seasonal change. This is where the story rests now, not ended, but rooted, rising again and again in every act of grateful remembrance. As winds gather and stars wheel gently above the sleeping earth, may we walk softly in their echo, bearing the breath they once steadied through dust and darkness. They remembered the sacred covenant between humanity and earth when all else was forgotten. And because they did, we remain, not as conquerors of this world, but as its devoted witnesses. So, let this be the final breath drawn from firelight and soil, not as a farewell, but as an eternal bow to the unseen thread that holds us to the earth. The Great Drought, now buried beneath epochs of stone and centuries of forgetting, leaves behind a truth too sacred for extinction. It teaches that survival, in its purest form, is not conquest over hardship, but communion through it, a tender knowing stitched into blood and bone that life is not guaranteed, but gifted. Their story, born of silence, nourished by memory and tended with reverent breath through 70,000 years, lives on whenever we listen to the hush before rain, whenever we plant seeds with care, whenever we pause beneath the stars and understand we do not stand alone. The cracked soil of their desperate migrations now cradles forests. Their parched riverbeds flow abundant once more. Yet within us remains the ancestral memory of thirst and the sacred gratitude for water's return. This was never merely prehistory. It was the first sacred vow between humanity and earth, sealed through suffering and reverence. And as we move forward from this tale, may each step upon the soil remember what echo lingers beneath. Not greatness, but gratitude. Not legacy, but listening. Not dominion, but deep and enduring belonging. They walked through fire and famine so we could remember. And now, in the hush that cradles their final embers, we carry the flame onward, not as our own, but as the sacred trust of those who once nearly vanished, and instead became the ancestors of all who breathe today. And so, let the dust draw in once more around the story's final breath, folding it gently into the soil as the earth closes its ancient palms around all that was once nearly lost. The fire has given its last warmth, the wind its final whisper, and still the silence holds firm, sacred, and alive. The Great Drought may fade behind the veil of time, but its lesson remains etched in every careful act of remembrance. For in the face of hunger and silence, of wandering and unknowing, humanity did not vanish. It listened, it believed, it endured. In that endurance, it wove the first threads of what it means to belong, not with dominion or glory, but with quiet, sacred awe. Ancient handprints, ochre-stained and pressed against cave walls 70 millennia ago, still speak to us through time, reminding us that survival was never merely physical, but spiritual, a covenant sealed between people and land through suffering and devotion. Beneath the turning stars, above the softened earth, we stand now as their echo, their becoming, the continuation of a pilgrimage begun when all seemed lost. Through mineral-rich soil and crystalline waters bubbling from limestone hollows, their presence endures, not as conquerors, but as reverent walkers who chose faith when darkness pressed closest. Let us walk forward lightly, bearing not conquest, but care, not entitlement, but reverence. And in the deepest hush of every rain-washed dawn, let us remember, we are still here because they were never forgotten. So now the fire sleeps, and the valley breathes without voice, carrying forward the story, no longer in retelling, but in quiet inheritance. Somewhere beneath layers of rain-softened earth and wind-sung stone, the memory of the Great Drought remains not fossilized, but living, threaded through every act of gratitude we offer the land. Though time continues its unrelenting tide, sweeping away names, shelters, and even the outlines of rivers, it cannot erase the reverence carved into the soul of our species by those who walked through desolation, lit only by memory and hope. Their footprints have long since vanished, yet their essence permeates the soil where new life stirs, a testament to their unwavering resilience. Through 70 millennia, their legacy pulses beneath our conscious thought, awakening whenever we pause before taking from the earth, whenever we listen before speaking, whenever we honor what sustains us. Their survival was never meant to crown us with dominion, but to root us in devotion, to remind us that we are not above the earth, but born of it. In the hush before rainfall, in the sacred circle of firelight, in the whispered stories passed between generations, their covenant endures. Let this final breath rest not in conclusion, but in continuity, a sacred silence between heartbeats that holds their promise still, that when all else falters, remembrance can carry us forward. The stars still rise, the soil still waits, and we, humble in our passage, still walk the path lit by their enduring fire. And so, wrapped in the hush that only dawn dares disturb, the last ember of an epical memory fades not in forgetting, but in fulfillment. The Great Drought, that ancient crucible from which all human resilience was tested and born anew, leaves behind no conclusion, only continuation. Around early fires and the tracing of stars, in the breath held before rain touches earth once more, its echoes persist as sacred guidance.
Look to the south.
What once nearly ended our kind became instead our inward beginning, forging in silence the reverence and belonging that define us beyond tools or language. Their story, the ancestors with parched lips and eyes full of firelight, does not cease here, but lives on in each choice made with gratitude, in every quiet act of care toward a world that once withheld everything, and yet, through memory, gave us everything. We carry them still, not as shadows, but as luminous threads in the great weaving of life. And in that final silence, we understand. They never truly passed. They became the earth, the rain, the voice within the fire. And we, their becoming, walk onward, listening, remembering, belonging, under a sky that, through all its silence, still remembers how to reign. So now, in this closing breath, drawn not from speech, but from soil, let it be known that the story of the Great Drought is not merely ancient, it is eternal. It survives in the rhythm of life still unfolding, in rites quietly honored beneath sun and storm, in the sacred bond between our trembling souls and the earth that carried us forward when nothing else could. Though 70,000 years now press between those first footfalls and our own, the continuity remains unbroken. A whisper passed through time's hush, reminding us to walk lightly, to love deeply, to remember without ceasing. Their memory dwells not in stone or story alone, but in the way water tastes sweeter after thirst, in how we instinctively gather around flames when darkness encroaches, in the quiet reverence we feel when storm clouds gather on distant horizons. The drought came and nearly extinguished our kind, but it left behind a covenant, simple, enduring, alive, to never forget the silence that shaped us, to honor the land that held us, and to breathe with gratitude each moment we are given. There is no end here, only return. And as the last wind slips across that ancient valley, stirring leaves with memories older than language, we bow, not in finality, but in sacred remembrance. For we are still walking the path they illuminated with their unwavering faith, and the earth, listening still, walks with us. Let the circle close now with quiet grace, as every story sown of reverence must. The Great Drought, born not only of parched earth, but of parched spirit, etched its memory into the rhythm of all that followed. It marked a beginning disguised as an ending, a sacred silence where the first unspoken vow between humanity and the land took root. Though empires would rise and fall, though names would fade and tongues would shift, that vow endured, not in monuments, but in moments. A child watching rain streak down a stone, a song hummed low around a cooking fire, a pause before harvesting what the earth provides. The ancestors who survived that merciless crucible left behind no grand structures or written declarations, only this living covenant that flows through us still, whispering beneath modern noise, awakening when we stand beneath storm-clouded skies or cup water in reverent palms. Their legacy survives in the way firelight still draws us into circles of story, in how the scent of coming rain quickens something ancient in our blood, in the sacred pause that fills us when we witness beauty too profound for words. That covenant remains sealed in the hushed breath of dawn, and the last glow of embers turned to ash, alive wherever we walk with humility, remember with devotion, and live as stewards rather than owners. And so, let us leave this sacred telling gently behind as one sets down a vessel filled with flame, knowing it will still glow long after the story's last word has been spoken. The night deepens, the fire sleeps, and the earth, faithful still, carries us forward through the silence. So let this sacred telling rest now not in the stillness of absence, but in the fullness of remembrance, its embers folded gently into the marrow of what comes next. The fire is out, but not extinguished, for its warmth lives on in every breath we draw with reverence, in each step taken beside the earth rather than atop it. The voices of the first rememberers have long faded into rain and root, but their wisdom is etched into the contours of our being, shaping who we are, even when we forget where we came from. From desolation rose devotion. From famine came song. From silence emerged the sacred thread that stitches us to each other and to the land. As night deepens and stars retake the sky, may we walk forward into our own seasons of drought and abundance, not with fear, but with the quiet knowing inherited from those who once wandered the edge of nothing and chose, in every trembling moment, to remember their belonging. Let us now carry that memory gently, as they once carried the hope of rain, letting it guide us through fire, darkness, and silence, until we too become the whisper that helps the next fire rise. For in the end, it is not stone nor story, but the shape of our reverence that endures. And in this, the Great Drought never truly ended. It continues in the quiet rhythm of remembrance, still breathing, still belonging, still waiting for us to listen again. So, as the wind begins its long return over the ancient contours of the earth, let this final moment settle fully into silence. This is not the closing of a story, but the laying down of a sacred thread, gently placed into the soil where memory lives deepest. The Great Drought, for all its cruelty and quiet agonies, became the unwritten scripture of our becoming, inscribed not in stone tablets, but in the tender perseverance of those who walked, endured, and remembered. We bear their breath still, every heartbeat echoing the rhythm of that old covenant whispered beneath stars and firelight. Endure, remember, belong. And so, in this last hush, as stars lean close to listen and the earth curls once more into itself, let us carry forward what was entrusted across 70 millennia, not as history, but as holy guidance. For in the reverence of silence, in the humility of belonging, in the sacred patience of listening, we keep the ember alive. The fire rests, the earth watches, and in our remembering, the ancient story continues, soft and eternal. Beneath every footfall, we humbly take upon her sacred skin, and beneath all that, endures. Beneath the stories lit by firelight and carried through the hush of 70,000 years, the earth holds steady at the center of it all, a keeper of what once was and what still matters. The Great Drought's tale, vast and voiceless, speaks not of endings, but of a sacred pulse that continues to rhythm through each leaf's tremble, each quiet act of awe. In its silence, we hear not absence, but origin. The bones of ancestors who walked through that crucible rest now in soil that remembers their passage. Their molecules mingled with minerals that feed forests they never saw grow. Their journey echoes in the collective memory that stirs whenever clouds gather, after prolonged absence, whenever water is shared with reverent hands, whenever we pause to listen to what the land is trying to tell us. As this final ember folds into the soil, where memory sleeps and life begins again, we know with a certainty, born not of fact, but of feeling. The story lives on in the breath we draw, in the soil we tread, in the reverent stillness that returns every time the wind moves through the grass. This was never only history. It was a homecoming, a testament to the sacred covenant between humanity and earth that guides us still, in whispers too profound for words, in rhythms older than language itself. And now, with all breath spoken and every ember told, let the final silence fall like dew upon the ancient soil, wrapping the story in the stillness from which it was born. This is not conclusion, but continuity laid to rest in the sacred hollows of earth, where memory outlasts even time. The tale of the Great Drought, pulsing through 70,000 years of dust and devotion, returns to the silence at its heart, not to vanish, but to deepen. We walk forward now, not burdened by legacy, but blessed by it, humbled by the knowing that we are not alone, that in every gesture of gratitude, every prayer uttered in the hush of rain, the ancestors are there, their story still unfolding in our hands. Their journey through desolation whispers still in the marrow of our bones, in the reverent pause we take before disturbing waters, in the quiet awe that fills us beneath storm clouds gathering on distant horizons. And so, gently and fully, we close the circle, not as an ending, but as a solemn vow, to carry the fire not as conquest, but as care, not as possession, but as promise. As the last star fades from the ancient sky, the soil warms to our remembering, and the earth exhales. The covenant holds, the story endures. We belong, so let us walk away now, not from the story, but into it, into the long shadow of reverence that it casts over every living breath. The fire is silent, the voices have settled, and the land, faithful still, waits beneath us with open hands. We are not the ending, but the breath that continues, proof that memory does not vanish, but roots itself deeply where silence and story intertwine. The Great Drought lives on, not in ruin, but in the shape of our humility, in the weightless awe that still returns whenever sky breaks open and rain finds the land again. This is not goodbye, but a sacred remembering, etched now into the quiet chambers of the soul, murmuring through every gesture of care toward the earth that sustained us through darkness. We live because they listened to the whispers of distant springs when all else fell silent. We remember because they endured when surrender seemed the only choice. And in our remembering, their journey continues through our reverent hands, through our grateful hearts, through the covenant sealed 70 millennia ago that binds us still to this ancient soil where the fire never truly dies. And thus, in the silence that follows all sacred telling, the final breath of the Great Drought settles deep into the earth's waiting heart, not as a tale concluded, but as a vow forever remembered. For we are not separate from those ash-marked ancestors. We are their continuance, the unfolding of their sacred flame into new seasons, new sky. Their footsteps may be lost to dust and rain, but their reverence lives in ours, rising each time we pause before taking, each time we bow to water, each time we whisper thanks into the soil. The fire does not end. It moves within us, quiet and eternal, guiding not with dominion, but devotion. And so, as the stars return to their watch above sleeping valleys, and the wind returns to its song among the trees, the story slips once more beneath the roots, whole, unbroken, and alive.
Tell them of the great
Remember,
before the light dies.
endure, belong.